5 years of a civil war, 250,000 dead, a third round of peace talks kicking off in Geneva, and still Bashar al-Assad holds on to power. The Syrian president even casting his ballot today in a parliamentary poll. The election is denounced by Western powers as a sham, but if nothing else, it shows Bashar al-Assad's enduring control over key parts of the country. And in a further sign of defiance from the government, the deputy foreign minister today said that the opposition should just simply forget its dream once and for all of a political transition away from Bashar al-Assad. So is Syria today any closer to peace than it was when the war began? That's the question we're putting to my guests. Ayma Suleiman, who's going to tell us precisely, Ayma, what you do today. You're an advocate for Syrian...
I'm consultant to Syrian advocacy groups, actually.
And that involves?
Well, I do mainly communication, help them out with international media, and work with local NGOs as well.
All right. Dmitry Boschman, editor, Russian news outlet Sputnik here in France. Thanks for joining us. William Jordan is also with us, a France 24 regular. You're a former American diplomat. You used to serve in Damascus. And General Dominique Trinquant, also a France 24 regular, is the former head of the French military mission to the United Nations Security Council. General Trinquant, I want to put the first question to you. As the third round of peace talks gets underway in Geneva today, what is your gut feeling of where this is going?
I think this is really very much linked to what's happening on the ground. I think it was 2-3 weeks ago, the Syrian forces were, after the attack on Alep, were in Palmyra, and that was exactly when the discussion started in Geneva. And that was a way to put pressure around the table and saying that you've got to discuss with the Syrian government, the official Syrian government, because they are powerful. And then you had attacks from different movements on the Turkish border and now in Alep. And I think it's also because they want to show their muscle prior to start with the discussion. Today was the first discussion where they were face-to-face, which is very important, because up to now, they were in different rooms, and only the UN...
Indirect talks.
Indirect talks.
Yeah, exactly. And only the UN were, making a shuttle between the two rooms. Now they are facing each other, and they must take the habit to talk together, which they never did prior to that. So I think it will be a very long process, because they are so far away each other, that they need to understand that the government, the official Syrian government, will have to manage with this opposition, and the opposition will not have the power if they don't want to manage with the official Syrian government. So I think it will be a long process.
And the deputy Syrian foreign minister today saying, look, the opposition should just forget about its dream of moving away from Bashar al-Assad. You know, that's a strong statement, given that these talks are actually intended to invent a Syria that is post-Assad.
But you've got, when you start a negotiation, you can have strong declaration.
So they're raising the stakes.
Yeah, exactly. You put that forward, and then you know that you will have to move to somewhere else. And so if you don't start very high, then you will not achieve what you want to achieve.
Let's not forget as well that a transitional period for Syria and Syria without Assad is part of the 2254 U.S. resolution. Mm-hmm. Although the regime in the last peace talk session refused to admit this, and then they said, okay, we want to define what a transition period is. But now things are changing, because it's clearly stated in the resolution, and it's the will of Russia, and I mean their sponsors, Russia and the U.S. So they said, okay, fine, let us define this. And what they say publicly is definitely different than what goes on the ground. And plus, let's say that there should be a minimum compromise by the regime, even a talk. It might not be in this session. It might be in the next 6 months, but it will be coming.
When you say should be, do you mean you think there will be? Or do you mean morally speaking?
I think there will be, because Russia promised the U.S. a little cooperation from the Assad regime. So since so
But the
far,
regime is not going to negotiate itself out of power.
No.
That's true. That's true. But there should be probably, I mean...
So what are we looking at when you say a concession then?
So far, the regime did not. Let's put things in perspective. The reality on the ground, the regime has the upper hand. The regime is militarily advanced. The truce or the cessation of hostility was respected in the in the first few weeks, and now the situation is deteriorating.
It's breaking down. There's regular violence.
Yes, if there is no advance in the Geneva talk, it will break down. But the regime has the upper hand, and he did not go for any compromise whatsoever, and he's in a very comfortable condition. So why would he? But then again, if the peace talk sponsors want to improve, I mean, 2 months ago we did not imagine that there will be a ceasefire. Today, we're talking about a truce of almost 2 months, okay? So probably there will be...
Some would say a truce in name only, given that there is still fighting on the ground.
To be honest, the hostility was reduced by about 80%. There were some part. Few days ago, they started the operation for Aleppo, and that was by the regime, and the opposition retaliated and started its offense in Latakia and southern Aleppo. But let's say it happened, and hostility was reduced by 80%, and this is by itself was a great progress in the Syrian issue in the last 5 years.
William, I could see you shaking your head when we were talking about the Syrian regime and the fact that it wasn't going to negotiate itself out of power.
Well, look, I keep coming back to a point I've made several times on this platform, which is the rule of the rule of the game as far as the Syrian regime is concerned is to be steadfast. That's the word that they prefer to use in all of these kinds of situations. Hang tough. Maintain the upper hand as far as, using legality, international law, using everything possible to support your case, and just do not compromise. And as far as the Syrian regime is concerned, there are all of these formulas that have been worked out either in UN Security Council Resolution 2254, the Vienna Declaration that preceded that, and then the Geneva Declaration. But the Syrian regime has not signed on officially to any of these things.
That's true.
But it has agreed to go to Geneva, and it has agreed to go to all of these internationally organized negotiations on the expectation that if it shows up, it already scores high in terms of not, being on the defensive, and by virtue of still being the government of Syria, the legal government of Syria, whether or not, there's this contested legitimacy, it continues to argue that it's the legitimate government of Syria, and in that respect, it cannot be dictated to. And inasmuch as there is this general understanding, and it's embraced in all of the various principles, that whatever decision or whatever settlement comes out of all of these talks has to be something that comes from Syrians themselves. I mean, who represents the government of Syria, and who represents, therefore, through being the representative of the government of Syria, the Syrian people, but the regime. And I'm not defending, and I'm not trying to say anything here other than, as far as the regime is concerned, by showing up, they believe they have the upper hand, and by refusing to agree to demands that they have not previously accepted as the basis for a final settlement of this problem. They believe that they can hold on, and that with Russian backing on the ground, as far as the military part is concerned, and in terms of being able to play the United States and Russia.
So you're saying that just running out the clock, then, that it's an empty process?
As much as possible. Yeah,
this has been the tactic since the last 5 years.
Their strategy, and they are counting on the Syrian opposition to do what it has basically done up until now in all of these talks, and either fall out or walk away from the process because of the Syrians holding firm to their basic position. This makes the negotiation process being led by Staffan de Mistura that much more of a challenge for him or anybody else. And frankly, I believe that de Mistura has managed to get much further than I thought he ever would have, especially given...
You mean just by getting delegations to come to these negotiations?
Not just that. Getting them to come...
What result has he achieved?
Well, he has come up with this paper that outlines 12 sort of principles of sort of common
There's a political
understanding.
transition, and there's supposed to be an election after a year and a half,
none
but
of
it's
this
not
is
happening.
No, it's not happening. And as General Trinquant said, this is going to be, and I think everybody going into this expected it was going to be a long process. And in fact, the timetable for these discussions and for arriving at a final resolution is 18 months.
18 months.
And so nobody had any naive expectation that we were going to be racing to some kind of a settlement. I mean, I've said many times that Syria for a long time has dreamed of being where Libya is in terms of its own difficult process of negotiation. And we've seen how long and how difficult that has been. Syria is at the beginning of a process.
So just for a point of reference for our viewers, in Libya there were two rival governments. It was really a very messy situation for a number of years, but there now appears to be the makings of a unity government because it's been approved by the UN, and at least one of the two rival powers have sent it.
But after years of very difficult UN-led...
And you say Syria wants to get to that point? When you say Syria, do you mean...
hope to get to that,
Syria
but
would
they're
hope to get to
far.
that. Syria would hope to get to that.
Do you include the government of Bashar al-Assad in there? You think Bashar al-Assad wants to get to that point?
No, Bashar was...
No. I'm
opposition.
talking about Syria, sort of including everybody. But in terms of the regime, no. I mean, I think the regime is hoping to be able to use this process in order, as I say, to both run out the clock and to and to basically force the other parties to give up. Because they're too stubborn. I mean, the regime is too stubborn and
Can I elaborate on this?
Let's just bring in Dimitri Boschman.
First of all, I wouldn't give Libyan case as a positive example. That's it just doesn't work.
No, my point though, in talking about the Libyan case, is that Libya is in an advanced state vis-a-vis Syria as far as bringing all of the factions together and having a UN-led process. It could break down tomorrow. And if you want to jump ahead to what I would say later in this, that is ultimately what I think is going to happen, even if we arrive in some 18 months with a political settlement in Syria. There's very little that is going to cause it to cohere and to hold. And I believe that the breakdown of the talks will come at a point probably when there is supposedly a political settlement around which everybody is supposed to agree.
Well, there's a deadline.
But in the implementation, that's where it will all begin
repeating
to
the
fall apart.
same logic as President Obama, who said that his greatest mistake...
Yeah, he considers Libya was his greatest mistake.
Libya was his greatest mistake, although he believes that the intervention was better for the country. Otherwise, it would have been as bad as in Syria, meaning that there still be an intervention needed in Syria. But I would...
Syria is also President Obama's administration's fault.
Yes.
Because let's...
We'll get to the U.S. role in just a moment.
I would like to finish my point. We've mentioned that Assad is probably pursuing some his own goals in...
well, presumably it's staying in power.
Staying in power or keeping the status quo or whatever it is. But today we see clearly that there is a government that wants to break the status quo. Today's leaks in the Washington Post from the CIA and the military officials from the U.S. The article in Washington Post states clearly that there is a plan B, the so-called plan B, if the truce collapses. But we cannot say if it stalks or not.
We can predict reading.
I didn't see this article.
So basically there is a plan B if the
and
talks
reportedly,
fail,
what is the plan B for our viewers?
to sell or to supply the Syrian rebels with heavy weaponry.
So if diplomatically Washington doesn't get what it wants, it provides more weapons and tries to tilt the balance of power from a military standpoint.
Leads eventually to more bloodshed, and that is completely.
That really doesn't sound,
But that's-
General, I don't know what you think, but that really doesn't sound like anything new. I mean, over the last 5 years, how many times have we discussed one or other of the international patrons, key players in this conflict, trying to tip things by providing weapons to one or another of
And
the...
they do provide.
And it has...
the U.S. has failed so far, I have to be said.
Exactly, that was a failure. Each time they provided weapons, the weapons were going on the wrong side, and they have to change the plan, to stop providing weapons, to stop providing money. I mean, we see clearly that in the opposition, we've got several opposition. You were talking about the ceasefire. The ceasefire is holding. Just remember that only al-Nusra and AI are not part of the...
Technically, it's not a ceasefire.
Cessation of hostilities, but I think to make things simple.
Not the same.
Yeah, sure. I mean...
Well, people stopped fighting for a while. I
there
think we
are
can agree on
two-
that.
Without any political agreement on the side, without any deployment of forces, that's not a ceasefire. That's a temporary
A
truce.
ceasefire, by definition, is a military matter, is not a political matter. And there is a ceasefire, meaning that the fire is ceased on the ground, except for the two movements I was quoting, al-Nusra and and for the rest of the opposition, they are split. You've got several movements of opposition, and nobody is able really to gather that and to have at the table in Geneva people who are represented clearly on the ground with these forces under their command, which is not the case. Which is the case which make the things more easy for the Syrian government, because they've got an army, even if it's supported by Iran, by Hezbollah, by Russia, they've got an army under command, which is not really the case on the other side.
All right, Emma, just going to have to cut you off for a moment. We'll continue in part 2 of the France 24 debate. Do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment for the second part of this debate.